All right, what's up, everybody? Finally, the gym is back together. The flood has ended. That was a nightmare of a week, but we're back. I had to take apart the entire gym, mop everything up, and just, it sucked. My body's beat, my brain is fried, but we're here. I finally got a lift in today, which was nice. The cable machine that's behind me, I took it out. It's literally the exact height of my ceiling. So I take it out, mop it up, go to put it back, and it just magically doesn't fit. So apparently my cable machine is taller now for some reason. Of course, something had to go wrong. But either way, having this all set up and finished off and ready for me to lift, it's a huge weight off my shoulders, at least for now, because I do have Smith machine hack squats tomorrow. But anyways, enough ADD for now. Let's actually get to the video that you guys clicked on. So 7 lifts that I wish I did when I was younger, that I wish I did sooner in my lifting career. The first episode of this I did make last year with some great lifts like the JM press, etc. You can check that out if you like. If I remember, I'll link it. I have 7 great lifts today that I regret not doing sooner. Some of these are because I just didn't know the lift existed. And most of these are because I didn't actually understand the mechanics of any of these lifts, which, as annoying as the biomechanics people can be on social media, like, we all get it. Those guys think biomechanics is the only thing that matters with lifting, and of course that's not true. Programming is just as important, if not more important, but biomechanics does play a role, and understanding it gives you the keys to understand exercise selection. And of course, you have to understand programming too, but biomechanics and the mechanics of a lift that you're doing, it's pretty helpful to understand how the stuff works. The first lift, the preacher curl, this is ironic because looking back, the preacher curl got me big biceps. This is the first lift that I really started doing consistently when I first started lifting. It got me pretty jacked biceps, but I didn't think that was the lift doing it because I didn't feel much of a contraction. And you can start to see where understanding biomechanics, and I know we didn't have all this information back then when I first started lifting, but I wish I did this lift more, and I didn't just stop doing it because I didn't feel enough of a contraction. Knowing what I know now, this is a lengthened biased lift. A lot of people don't think that because you're putting your bicep in a shorter position by putting it in front of you, but the tension curve is in the bottom, which is the lengthened position of your bicep in that given lift. And not many lifts do a good job of this. A lot of people prefer the machine for preacher curls because it keeps constant tension throughout the entire range of motion. I actually prefer the good old school, just easy bar preacher curl because it biases the lengthened position. And I don't think this is the one lift to rely on for growing your biceps, but I think it's a great lift to have in your program. And I actually got a preacher bench back there from Hammer Strength, beauty of a find on the marketplace, and I'm loving it. It was great. I just did them for the first time today in like 5-6 years. I missed them. They're great. Knowing what I know now, I'm like, this is what my bicep training has been missing lately. So I think what preacher curls do is what a lot of people think incline curls do. And stay tuned because I do touch on incline curls throughout this video. Number 2, Smith machine pressing. Looking back in hindsight, of course, we have a better judgment looking into the past than we do in the present moment. Smith machine pressing is something I should have been doing much sooner. I was getting stupidly strong on bench press, but I wouldn't dare to touch a machine because it was going to injure my shoulders, shrink my muscles. I was going to lose all my strength on bench, which is, of course, the number one correlation. Your powerlifting 1 rep max bench is the best correlation to your chest size. So, of course, I couldn't risk not using a barbell bench press or I would just magically shrink. So, as you can see, that was a pretty big mistake. I should have been doing Smith machine pressing sooner. And that's not to demonize a barbell bench, but I should have not been dogmatic. Seriously, Smith machines are great. I personally prefer them to a barbell because it's basically the same range of motion in everything. And this a very similar bar path, very similar mechanics. However, it has more stability. So you can really, really grind out reps on the Smith. And what I'm finding is those last couple reps, are making the difference for me. It's like, I don't know if you guys feel this, but if you're ever doing a machine press, you can just feel when you hit that sticking point, and I can actively feel more muscle fibers activating. And we all know for hypertrophy, you want to get everything activated. You have to really force that to happen. And it's not to say you can't do it with a barbell, but on a Smith machine, it just hits different. It's a great lift. Number 3, incline pushdowns. And I have to give a shout out to Paul Carter for this one. This is something that initially I don't want to say I came up with this idea first or anything, but when you're like a gym bro like me, you come up with all of these things, you kind of think about these things, and you think of whether it's worth trying or not. And a few years ago, I kind of just wrote this lift off because I was like, oh, well, if the weight's too heavy, it's just going to pull me off the bench anyways, just like standing up. But little did I know that if I actually had a bench that had any type of grip on it whatsoever, it's just going to hold you in place. So as you get stronger and as you just get bigger, when you build up your muscle, it gets stronger. I've built up my triceps quite a bit. When I do push downs, the thing levitates me off the ground and my abs are not strong enough to hold me into that position to actually do push downs. So for a while, I haven't been able to do push downs, or at least effectively, using the bench for stabilization and just to keep me locked into a certain point. It helps a ton. And this lift has really, really helped me bias the mid-range of a push down. And my abs aren't giving out. It's a pure isolation for the triceps. It's similar to what a JM press does, except it eliminates your front delt and even a little bit of your chest entirely. It keeps it to a pure elbow extension, and it perfectly isolates your triceps. This is a lift that I wish I found out like a long time ago, like 5-6 years ago. When I was a beginner, probably didn't need something this fancy, but now that I'm strong, yeah, this helps a ton. So I wish I knew this one sooner. Number 4, rounded back, quote unquote, dumbbell rows. I used to do dumbbell rows and try and squeeze as much as I could and not really focus on the stretch. The rounded back really lets me get into a position where I can feel my upper back get that stretch. I'm not doing these to target the lats. Of course, the lats will get some growth. For myself, I've always found diagonal or mostly vertical pulls, especially with a neutral grip, to target my lats best. Neutral grip pull-ups have been a staple, neutral grip pull-downs as well for my lat training. But for upper back, and I'm talking like mid to low traps, that rhomboid area, even the upper traps a little bit, these rounded back rows do an excellent job of getting everything up there stretched out. Think about it like opening your chest when you're doing, say, a dumbbell bench or a fly, when you really feel your chest stretch out. This is essentially the same thing, just reversed for your upper back. And when you can find that path that your hand travels in, or the angle that you put your hand at, and you can feel when that trap is activating and stretched out, it's a lift that I couldn't recommend more. I think everybody should at least give it a try. Having at least one stretch biased row in your program is super helpful. And one tip for these is you're going heavier because you're focusing on the stretch. You're stronger in this position. You're not going to be able to get your elbow up all the way to your side, or even let alone behind you. Getting it up just to torso height, where it's just about to poke your stomach here, is perfectly fine. You don't want to just do mini reps in the bottom, but you don't need to go all the way back. That's not the purpose of this lift. So 3/4 reps, totally fine here. You're training that specific portion of the lift. You can have a million other things in your program to bias that actual contraction. Up next, cable lateral raises. And again, you're seeing a trend here. This is actually understanding tension curves. When it comes to the cable lateral raise, a lot of people do this. I don't want to say incorrectly because it's not an incorrect lift, but what they're trying to get out of this lift is something that isn't happening. So what they're doing is they grab onto the cable post and they lean away and they do side raises like this with the cable attached to the bottom. You're still pulling from the floor because you're leaning away now. The best thing to do is set the cable up to maybe knee height or even where your hands hang around mid-thigh. In this way, you're actually biasing the lengthened position in your lateral raises. A common issue that we run into on dumbbell raises is the super skewed tension curve. So the higher you go, the more tension you get. And it's really a limited range of motion that actually gets the tension. So a machine lateral raise, which most of us don't have access to, does a great job of evening out the tension curve. And with a cable, since you can play with the angle that gravity comes from, you can bias the mid-range, or basically get most of the range of motion to have tension. You can bias the lengthened range, which setting it up at like where your hands hang on your thighs is great for, or you can just set it up on the bottom setting, which is, I'd argue, just do a dumbbell lateral raise at that point instead. So understanding this and being able to train your delts in a stretch position, especially the side and rear delts, which don't get a ton of that, it's helped grow my side delts quite a bit. And even though delts are a low priority for me right now, I'm noticing pretty good gains, even just doing limited volume and frequency for these. Number 6, we've got incline curls. Incline curls are a lift that I wish I was doing sooner. And this lift, like I said earlier, it's not this magical lengthened position lift like a preacher curl. But what it does is it puts your bicep in a stretch and it purely isolates them. It's very, very hard to cheat. You can truly grind out reps here, and that's just what I've been doing. Basically, aside from preacher curls, which I just started literally doing 2 hours ago, incline curls are the only strict, like truly strict lift that I've had in my program in ages. And what I'm seeing is instant growth in my biceps. They're getting pretty big, and my numbers are going up from that. Like for reference, I was doing 32.5 pounds in each hand on incline curls for about 8 reps per set. And this is maybe 7, 8, 9 weeks ago. And at this point, and of course, this is some just strength gains that doesn't directly correlate with muscle. Just because I'm twice as strong doesn't mean my muscle's twice as big. That doesn't make any sense. But now I'm doing 52.5 pounds for 6 reps. I hit the 55s for 5 as well. So if that says anything, this is a purely strict bicep movement. And of course, some of this is neurological. It's a new movement. I'm learning the movement pattern and becoming more efficient at it. But there have been muscle gains in that strength gain. And I think a lot of that strength gain is just from getting bigger biceps, from truly isolating them. And of course, dead stop variations have been a staple in my program for 6, 8, 10 months at this point, and those are great, but they're not quite as strict as they sound, and they're not quite as strict as something like an incline curl. It's a true isolation. Your body's locked in. Even a seated dumbbell curl, you can still lean forwards. When you're leaned back on an incline, it's pretty tough to move. So I'm definitely a fan of this lift, and I wish I was doing it sooner. And the last one I've got here is Romanian deadlifts. This is one of my biggest mistakes when it comes to lifting. I stuck with sumo deadlifts for so long because I was so incredibly dogmatic about the powerlifting total being correlated to hypertrophy. So I didn't even have the mental capacity to think about these lifts critically, because I was like, oh, well, if I just prioritize RDLs, my deadlift strength is going to go down. And I see, this is the problem, is I was only caring about 1 rep max, but I wasn't actually caring about the stimulus that you get from it. And this is one of the biggest things that I've learned about lifting over the past few years, is that, of course, progressive overload is key. Most of the time, with proper training and getting enough stimulus, you can build the momentum that you need to cause progression to happen. And I was so dogmatic about one side of that equation. I thought absolutely nothing of what I was actually getting out of that lift, and I only thought about progression. So the way that I see it is, you can progress in anything. Like, take basketball, for example. Like, if you play, or say you take 5 shots, say you take 5 3-point shots on day 1, and then you take 6 the next day, 7 the next day, you'll keep progressively overloading in basketball, but you're not going to get bigger from that because it doesn't stimulate hypertrophy, right? So you can keep going forever, but you're not going to turn into a bodybuilder because you're just magically reaping results of progressive overload. And of course, that's a stupid example, but it makes sense when you look at it in terms of exercise selection too. So when you take a sumo deadlift, I would argue this lift for a certain amount of people isn't that hypertrophic. And of course, it's a weight and there's tension. You're going through a range of motion, and you can train it close to muscular failure. So you're going to get some hypertrophy, but there's a lot of drawbacks to this lift where no matter how much you progress it, you're not getting as good hypertrophy as you could from a lift that's the most hypertrophic possible. So what you want to do is find the lift that targets the muscle in the best way that you possibly can, and then focus on progressive overload. And typically, you don't have to focus on it. It just kind of happens when you train hard enough. And I know a lot of people do put a ton of focus onto it, but when you're training properly, you really just need to kind of let it happen. And of course, if you're running into plateaus and everything's turning into a mess, you do need to look at your programming and make changes as necessary. But in most cases, at least for myself, when I focused too much on progressive overload, it was at the expense of my muscle growth. That's all I got for you guys today. These 7 lifts are lifts that I would definitely recommend doing if you haven't tried them and you're not doing them already. I will probably make a follow-up to this at some point later this year because I think it's interesting to just look back over time. That's one thing about my programming, is the way I do it is I'll never just run an 8-week program and then say, all right, let me build another 8-week program and just arbitrarily change it. I change when I have to. When I'm forced to make changes, I'll make changes. But it's usually one thing here and there. So I'll never be on an entirely new program. But 6 months later, my program looks quite a bit different than it did 6 months ago. So stuff like this is always interesting. It's like I don't realize that I made all these changes until I look back. But yeah, I hope you guys learned a lot from this video. Let me know what you think in the comments.